I hadn't planned on arriving early. The truth was, I'd just woken up restless. Couldn't go back to sleep, couldn't shake the thought that something felt off. So instead of waiting until 10 like usual, I pulled the spinach and goat cheese quiche out of the oven at 9:15, covered it with foil, and slid it into the passenger seat like a sleeping infant. The drive to my mom's house took 23 minutes if I skipped the freeway and took the winding route past the park. I liked the quiet. I liked the illusion of peace. I'm Corinne Astor, 35, senior urban planner for the city of Portland. I own a duplex near Hawthorne that I renovated myself over 4 years. Restored crown molding, repointed brickwork, even landscaped the backyard with native plants. I live upstairs and rent out the bottom unit to a retired couple who've become something like surrogate grandparents. I've never married, no kids. And according to my family, that makes me the one with all the flexibility. When I pulled into the driveway that Sunday, the lawn was still damp from last night's rain, and someone had left a scooter tipped over on the walkway, probably one of Sadie's kids. I picked it up, brushed off the handle, and climbed the steps toward the side entrance. It was an old habit entering through the kitchen like I used to after school when Mom would leave out peanut butter toast and cassette tapes of Frank Sinatra humming through the radio. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard my name. Corinne. She's single. No kids. She'll cover the mortgage. She always does. It was my mother's voice. Steady, like she wasn't even embarrassed to say it. I froze mid-step. The quiche shifted slightly in my arms, and I gripped the dish tighter to keep from dropping it. The kitchen window was cracked open above the sink. Through the screen, voices carried easily my mother's and my sister Sadie's. She won't go for it, Sadie said, her tone clipped. She will, Mom replied. She always has. You remember how easily she signed over her stimulus check during COVID, just told me to give it to you for the boys. She never asks questions, just gives. I stood there still as the stone frog in Mom's garden. The wind picked up brushing damp hair against my cheek. My fingers were starting to ache from the heat of the dish, but I didn't move. But what if the renters won't leave? Sadie asked. That lady downstairs has been there for 3 years they'll go, Mom said flatly. We'll say the unit is being reclaimed for family use. Corinne can give them notice. It's her name on the lease, not mine. You're sure she won't freak out? She's Corinne, Mom said with a little laugh. She'll blink twice, sigh, and say, Okay, I'll figure it out. I pressed my back against the siding. The familiar chill of aluminum made me shiver. They weren't just asking me for help. They were planning around me like I was an account to draw from, not a person to ask. And the worst part? They weren't wrong about the pattern. I had always said yes. Sadie, you and Nate need a fresh start, Mom continued. That unit is perfect. It's not like she's using it for anything important. She's getting a raise, right? Sadie added. You said something about her new city contract. Yep, and if she doesn't offer, we'll bring up the time she stayed rent-free in my basement after grad school. Call it even. Sadie snorted. Emotional blackmail. I like it. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until the sharp sting in my chest made me gasp. I stepped back slowly, the stair creaking just once, but no one inside seemed to notice. I adjusted my grip on the quiche, turned around, and walked down the steps like I hadn't just listened to the people who were supposed to love me the most reduce my autonomy to a strategy. The old me might have stormed in, demanded answers, made a scene in the middle of the kitchen. But I've learned something about silence. Sometimes it tells you more than confrontation ever could. I walked around to the front of the house and rang the doorbell like a guest. Corinne, Mom, beamed as she opened the door. You're early, Sadie's just putting the coffee on. I smiled and held up the dish. Hope you're hungry. It's still hot. I walked into the kitchen and placed the quiche on the table like it was any other Sunday. Like I hadn't just heard them make plans to dismantle part of my life without so much as a conversation. Smells amazing, Sadie said, pulling mugs from the cabinet. She didn't meet my eyes. Thanks, I replied. I used extra time. Thought it might bring out the flavor. But what I thought really as I folded the foil back and watched the steam rise was something else entirely. You think I'll stay quiet. You think I'll just give. You don't know me at all. I didn't stay long after brunch. Made some excuse about needing to prep for Monday's zoning meeting. Mom barely blinked, just asked me to take some extra pastries home-day-olds from Sadie's friend's bakery. I wrapped them up in wax paper and thanked her. Smiled, nodded, hugged, waved, the whole routine. On the drive back, I kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the warm paper bag like it might anchor me in something real. The city blurred past in soft tones of gray and green. I didn't turn on the radio. Silence felt sharper now. At home, I dropped the bag on the kitchen counter and walked straight to my desk. I opened my laptop and pulled up the tenant lease agreement first. I had written it myself, clearly worded, legally binding, with a no-fault termination clause that required 60 days' notice. Mrs. Lockwood and her husband had signed it last year when they renewed. They were quiet, paid on time, and once brought me homemade peanut brittle for Christmas. They'd lived downstairs for 3 years and treated the place like it was their own. There was no way I'd just evict them because my sister needed a crash pad. The lease was solid. That gave me a flicker of relief until it wasn't. I logged into my mortgage account next. I wasn't even sure why. Just an itch. Something unspoken had started to curl in my stomach during brunch, like a thread pulled too tight. The login screen popped up. Username, password, security code from my phone. I typed it all in fingers moving automatically as if they knew what I didn't want to admit. And then I saw it. Under recent activity. There had been 3 failed login attempts in the past week, all from an IP address based in Oregon, but not one of mine. One was at 1:42 a.m. 2 nights ago. The others clustered around midday. I stared at the screen. My mouth had gone dry without me noticing. Failed attempts aren't unusual. I told myself that. Could have been a typo. Could have been a system glitch. But deep down, I knew better. It was the same feeling I got when I found my favorite mug suddenly chipped and no one remembered dropping it. Something small, but not right. And when you're someone like me, someone who double-checks locks and scans receipts, it hits different. I clicked over to my email. Nothing flagged. But I scrolled back through old messages from Mom, from Sadie. There were little things now that made me stop. One, from 3 weeks ago. Do you still have that mortgage info saved somewhere? I want to compare lenders for Nate's cousin. At the time, I didn't even respond. It had sounded like one of her throwaway questions, but now it sat there like a trap I'd stepped around without realizing. I opened a blank spreadsheet. Title Family Requests. Corinne Astor. The first line I entered was, then, by the time I got through just the most recent few years, I was already above $17,000. Not counting the thousands I'd gifted back when Sadie got married, when Nate's business launched and failed, when Mom had her dental implant surgery and didn't want to tap into retirement. I sat back in the chair. The spreadsheet glowed on the screen cells, neatly lined like tombstones. For years, I'd called it help, support, the good daughter doing what she could. But today, it looked different. It looked like compliance. Like I'd been conditioned to give to hand over without question, to treat family like an open tab with no credit limit. I clicked back to the mortgage account, set 2-step authentication, changed the password. Then I called the bank and flagged the activity. They logged it, asked if I wanted to freeze external access. I said yes. My voice was calm, colder than I expected. After that, I printed a fresh copy of the lease agreement and filed it in a new folder marked Asset Protection. 2024. I slid it into the lockbox with my birth certificate, passport, and the deed to the house. I was still scared. That hadn't changed. But something else was beginning to form beneath it. Not quite anger. Not yet. Just a strange, solid quiet. The kind that comes right before the ground shifts. The kind that doesn't need anyone else's permission to move. By the time the sun started to set, the pastries on the counter had gone stale untouched. I opened the fridge, stared blankly for a while, then closed it again. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't sure what I was exactly, but I knew what I wasn't going to be anymore. A target, a backup plan, the one who always says yes. The next morning, I didn't bother with coffee. I just sat down at my desk, opened the laptop, and stared at the spreadsheet from the night before. The cells blinked at me in soft blue and white, neatly lined like confessionals waiting to be filled. Outside the window, the world was going about its business, school buses, groaning joggers passing in fleece layers, the neighbor's dog barking at nothing in particular. But inside my apartment, everything felt razor sharp. I clicked into the spreadsheet and created a new tab. Title: Untracked Family Support. I didn't need to pull receipts. These numbers weren't hidden in my bank account, they were burned into memory. They weren't expenses, they were stories. Each one wrapped in guilt and wrapped again in the illusion of generosity. I typed, each entry came with a memory, a scene, a manipulation dressed up as a moment of family unity. Every one of them built on this unspoken rule that I wouldn't say no, that I had more, so I should give more. That being single meant I didn't need to worry about saving for anyone but myself. I kept typing. By the time I stopped, the total was over $38,000. And that wasn't including the random Amazon packages Sadie had shipped to my house because I have Prime, or the time I paid the electric bill for both units when Mom insisted she'd forgotten it was her turn. None of it was documented. None of it was officially a loan. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was pattern. And patterns tell a story even when people lie. I created a third tab, Verbal Promises Never Kept, and then a fourth, Attempts to Access My Accounts. I wasn't sure what I'd use this for yet, but I knew one thing with more clarity than I'd ever had before. If they ever tried to come for me again, legally, emotionally, financially, I would have the record. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted proof. Because sometimes the people who hurt you will rewrite history in real time if you let them, and I wasn't going to let them anymore. At around 10, I got a text from Mom. Hope you got home okay. Can you send me the name of that bank you use again? Nate wants to open a new account. I stared at the screen. Then I opened my Notes app and copied in the text, time-stamped it, and saved it under possible social engineering attempts. There was a version of me not long ago who would have responded instantly, who would have said, "Of course, here's the number, let me know if you want me to help set it up." That version of me had been rewarded with praise and guilt in equal measure. That version of me didn't exist anymore. I closed the spreadsheet and backed it up to an external drive. Then I stood up, went into the kitchen, and opened the fridge. I took out a half-empty bottle of sparkling water, poured it over ice, and leaned against the counter. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't change. They were wrong. And I had the ledger to prove it. It showed up in one of those harmless-looking manila folders, the kind with soft edges and no reason to raise suspicion. Mom handed it to me on Wednesday afternoon, right after I pulled into her driveway with a replacement curtain rod she'd asked me to grab from the hardware store. "Oh, and while you're here," she said casually, "can you look over this? Just some insurance stuff. Standard boilerplate. I thought we could get a head start on it in case anything happens with the house." She didn't look at me when she said it, just fussed with the hem of the kitchen towel she'd been twisting between her hands. That was always her tell. Something about the way she smoothed things down when she was about to stir things up. I took the folder without opening it. "Sure. I'll take a look at it tonight." She nodded quickly. "No rush. Just, you know it's good to have everything aligned. If something were to happen, accident memory loss, we'd want the right people in place." I didn't say anything. Just smiled the way you do when someone is offering you poison in a teacup. At home, I placed the folder on the kitchen counter next to the unopened mail and let it sit there while I made dinner. But I didn't eat. I picked at roasted carrots, barely touched my wine. The folder stayed closed until nearly 10 when I finally sat down at the table, turned on the overhead light, and flipped it open. The first few pages looked innocent enough copies of the home insurance policy, the contact info for her old broker, even a sheet with bullet points titled "Helpful Tips If Something Happens to Me." I scanned it slowly, waiting for the moment my stomach would drop. It came on page 6. The document wasn't labeled clearly. No bold heading, no signature line yet. But I'd worked in city planning long enough to recognize a power of attorney form when I saw one, especially one buried between pages meant to lull someone into passive agreement. This one was pre-filled with my name, listing me as the primary agent in case of medical emergency or property-related decisions. There was a clause that allowed for direct action in financial matters related to real estate holdings and mortgage negotiation. In short, if I signed it, she'd have backdoor access to everything tied to my home. She could refinance, redirect payments, maybe even initiate tenant notices under the guise of protecting her interests. It was expertly disguised, but not expert enough. I closed the folder carefully as if it might explode. Then I placed it under the toaster somewhere visible but not worthy of panic. And then I opened my laptop. The lawyer I contacted wasn't someone I'd ever met in person, but I'd heard her name enough around City Hall to trust the referrals. Her name was Sharon Liu, early 40s, sharp eyes, the kind of voice that didn't rise or fall for anyone else's comfort. Her email reply came that same night, quick and concise. I have availability tomorrow after 3. Bring everything. By the next afternoon, I was sitting across from her in a corner office filled with framed maps and legal awards. She took one look at the paperwork and snorted. "Well, this is sneaky," she said, flipping the pages with a manicured thumb. "But legally meaningless unless you sign. It's a glorified suggestion sheet right now, but I'd bet good money this was handed to you with a smile and zero context." I nodded. "And let me guess you own your home outright. Mortgage almost paid. Title's clean. It was part of a transfer from my godmother. I did a full title search when I inherited it." She leaned back, tapping her pen against the folder. "Then you're fine. No one else has any legal access to your property, your tenants, your accounts, nothing. But I'd lock this all down now, Corinne. If they're trying to sneak in with documents like this, it means they've already decided you're an obstacle to be managed." I swallowed the lump that had been sitting in my throat since the night I heard my name spoken like an ATM code. "What do I need to do?" She smiled just a little. "You already started. You didn't sign. That's step 1. Step 2, revoke any shared authorizations you might have granted over the years. Power bill access, tax logins, co-signing arrangements. Lock your credit reports. Set fraud alerts. And if you want to be proactive." She handed me a small stack of templates. "You can file a notice of interest at the county clerk's office. It's not standard for homeowners, but it puts a public marker that you're monitoring your title actively. It sends a message. A message. That's what this was about now. Not just protection, not just reaction. Message." That night, I drove home with the folder beside me on the passenger seat. The same seat where lasagnas used to sit, still warm, covered in foil, bound for people who saw my love as leverage. I didn't destroy the folder. I didn't even hide it. I left it in plain view on my kitchen counter, exactly where my mother had placed it in my life, with quiet hands and ulterior motives. This time, though, the story would end differently. I wasn't going to be managed. I wasn't going to be used. And I sure as hell wasn't going to sign. I waited until Monday to make the call. Not because I wasn't ready, I'd been ready for days, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't doing it out of spite. The folder was still sitting on the counter exactly where I'd left it after my meeting with Sharon Liu. I'd considered moving it, tossing it into a drawer, hiding it beneath tax files, but somehow it felt right for it to sit there in the open. A quiet monument to everything they thought they could slide past me. The realtor's name was Avery Claiborne. He wasn't flashy. No gold-lettered website or slogan about turning dreams into addresses. Just clean-cut competence and a quiet reputation in city planning circles for being discreet. We'd crossed paths on a few zoning board meetings. He always wore, Navy spoke plainly, and made smart eye contact. I trusted him the way you trust someone who never over-explains. He picked up on the second ring. "Corinne Astor," he said, his voice smooth but alert. "Long time." "Hi, Avery. I need evaluation." Quiet. No signage, no neighborhood gossip. Just information. He didn't ask why. What address I gave it to him, and he promised to run comps and call me back the next day. When he showed up Wednesday morning, he was exactly as I remembered, blazer with elbow patches, leather folio under one arm, eyes that missed nothing. He didn't make small talk, just stepped inside, glanced around and nodded once. "You did all this yourself?" he asked, running a hand along the original oak molding near the entryway. "Every inch," I said. 4 years, nights and weekends. 2 cracked ribs from falling off a ladder. Worth it. He scribbled something in his pad. "These old homes, everyone wants charm without the work. Yours is the rare finished product. Plus, it's in the historic district. Big upside." I took him through the upstairs unit, first my space. Sunlight filtered through the south-facing windows, catching the curves of the old ceiling arches I'd restored by hand. The kitchen still smelled faintly of rosemary from the bread I'd baked over the weekend. I'd always taken care of it like it was more than a home, like it was proof that I'd built something alone and made it hold. We went downstairs next. The Lockwoods weren't home, but I'd told them I was having an appraisal. They were gracious about it as always. The space was tidy, warm, full of lived-in comfort. Avery stepped into the hallway and looked around slowly. This one, he said almost to himself. This is the kind of unit that sells a duplex. Not flashy, just livable. He took out his phone and snapped a few discreet photos, then we went back upstairs. I made coffee while he tapped into his tablet. Okay, he said finally. Based on recent comps within a 10-block radius adjusted for the condition of the structure and upgrades roof HVAC energy windows, I'd price this at just under $1.15 million. If you listed this week, I could get you a cash offer in under 48 hours. I nearly dropped the mug. I bought it for $340, I said. He gave a low whistle. Portland's changed. You improved it. Timing's right. I sat down across from him. The number should have made me feel something: pride, excitement, even greed. Instead, all I felt was clarity. I'd spent so long seeing the house as an obligation, a gift I had to protect. But now it felt like leverage, a choice that belonged only to me. I'm not ready to list, I said. He nodded, didn't press, just clicked his pen and folded his folio shut. When you are, let me know. No pressure. We can do this however you want. Off-market private showings, even a pre-list cash bid. I'll be discreet. I'll need time. You've got it. He stood, then paused. But just a heads-up word gets out fast when property shifts hands in this neighborhood. You sure you're ready for what comes next? I looked past him toward the quiche dish still drying on the rack. The one I'd brought to a brunch where my future had already been assigned without my input. Not yet, I said. But soon. He handed me a red folder before leaving his formal market analysis. I placed it on the counter next to the one my mother had brought over days earlier. Side by side, they looked almost identical. One held a trap, the other an exit. When the door closed behind him, I leaned against the kitchen counter and let myself breathe. Not deeply, not easily, but a little more than I had in weeks. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need drama. What I needed was a timeline. And for once, I was going to be the one drawing the lines. The text came on a Thursday morning, tucked between two work emails and a group chat about someone's birthday cupcakes. It lit up my screen just as I was reviewing permit language on a new mixed-use development in the Pearl District. I didn't even have to open it to know who it was from. The preview read, "Sadie just needs a few months." I set my coffee down and unlocked the phone. Mom, Sadie just needs a few months. The kids love that downstairs unit. It would mean so much to them. I know you understand. There was no hi, no how are you? Just the ask. Wrapped in sugar, but still an ask. And not a question, really more like a gentle nudge in a direction they'd already decided I would go. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, thumb hovering. My first instinct was to wait, to buy time, to find softer words than the ones sitting fully formed in my chest. But then I remembered Sharon Lou's voice in my head. "They've already decided you're an obstacle to be managed." I typed, "Me, it's occupied. I'm not making changes. Simple, factual. No apology." The read receipt popped up almost instantly, followed by the 3 blinking dots of someone typing, deleting, retyping. But no reply came. Not right away. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Sadie. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. By the 4th time, I picked up because part of me still hasn't unlearned the reflex of being the one who listens. "Hey," I said flatly. "You're serious." Sadie's voice was already tight, already trembling. "You're really not going to help." "It's not about helping," I said. "It's about boundaries. That unit is leased. It's not available. But you own the place," she snapped. "You can break the lease if you want to. You've done stuff like that before." "No," I cut in. "I haven't. I've never broken a lease. I've never disrupted someone's housing for convenience. I wouldn't do that to strangers. I'm sure as hell not doing it to people who've paid rent on time for 3 years. There was a pause, then the sharp inhale I knew too well. You're unbelievable, she said. You have everything, Corinne. No kids, no partner, no one to take care of but yourself. And still you act like you're the one struggling. Nate lost his job. Our landlord's raising rent by $700. We're out of options. You're out of options that don't involve me absorbing the fallout, I said. That's different. She went quiet for a beat, then her voice softened. The boys love that unit. Remember, you let them watch cartoons downstairs when Mom hosted Easter. They still call it Auntie Corinne's castle. I closed my eyes. That wasn't fair. She knew it wasn't fair, but that had always been her edge. She could weaponize nostalgia better than anyone. I'm sorry you're going through this, I said, but I'm not evicting my tenants. Not for a few months. Not for any reason. But it's family, she said the word, stretching like taffy. You always used to say that we show up for family. And I did. I replied the words, leaving my mouth calm but final. For years, I showed up. I paid. I rearranged my life around what everyone else needed. But this is a boundary I'm keeping. She started to cry. Real tears or not, I didn't know anymore. The lines had blurred too many times. You've changed, she said quietly. No, I said. I just stopped pretending I wasn't drowning while you asked for another life preserver. She hung up. No slammed door, no scream. Just the sudden empty silence of a line gone dead. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. I just stood there, phone still in my hand, staring out the window at the maple tree that had started to turn gold. The kind of gold that only comes from survival summer burned out fall rushing in like it has something to prove. I knew what would come next. Mom would follow up. There'd be a second wave, the guilt and grace approach. Maybe a call from Nate pretending to be reasonable. Maybe a group message with a photo of the boys' shoes untied and faces sticky captioned, "They miss their castle." But the castle wasn't theirs. It never had been, and I was finally done pretending I didn't know that. The subject line was simple. Quick chat, new opportunity. It came from my boss, Meredith Lang, a woman who rarely emailed without purpose and never included question marks unless something was truly in motion. It landed in my inbox the day after Sadie hung up on me. I almost didn't open it. My head was still thick with echoes, her voice my own, the soft thud of a door that hadn't closed but had certainly been pulled halfway shut. I clicked the email anyway. Meredith wanted to meet that afternoon. 15 minutes, she wrote. Promise. Just a conversation. At 3:00, I stepped into her corner office. It smelled faintly of eucalyptus and copier paper. Meredith looked up from her screen and motioned toward the chair across from her. She wore her usual soft gray blazer and cobalt glasses, the frames bold enough to signal she made her own decisions. Corinne, she said, tone crisp but not unfriendly. You've been on my mind. Not in a bad way, don't panic. I'm not panicking. She smiled. You've done good work this year, solid, clean, politically smart, and you've stuck out in all the right ways. Okay, I said, still not sure where this was going. There's a position opening in Amsterdam. It's part of the EU Collaborative on Sustainable City Planning. 2-year assignment liaison role. Same title, better salary. Housing stipend. We'd sponsor everything. I blinked. Amsterdam. She nodded. You'd be representing Portland as part of the International Design Exchange. It's a big deal, Corinne. Your name came up fast. The words settled in the air between us like snow that hadn't landed yet. Amsterdam. A city I'd visited once in college for 3 days, where I'd walked canal bridges at dawn and watched light flicker off water like it had secrets. A place with no history tied to me, no family, no half-buried traps. The idea came in soft at first, then louder. What would it feel like, I asked aloud, to be far enough away they can't knock? Meredith raised an eyebrow, not as a challenge, but as a quiet show of understanding. Do you want time to think about it? Yes, I said. Then 3 weeks. She nodded once. We'll hold it. But after that, we move to the next candidate. You don't have to say yes, Corinne. Just don't say no out of habit. I left her office with a new kind of silence trailing behind me, not dread, not fear, just space. A clean stretch of possibility I hadn't considered in years. That night, I walked home the long way. Past the hardware store where I'd picked out tiles for the bathroom. Past the community garden with the sagging gate I'd helped fund 2 summers ago. Past my favorite cafe with the wobbly tables and chalkboard menu. All these places I loved, all threaded through with small, invisible wires that pulled me back toward the version of myself that always stayed, always showed up, always covered. But what if staying wasn't strength? What if leaving wasn't failure? When I got home, I stood in the doorway for a long minute. The house smelled faintly of basil and dry plaster home, but also not in the way it used to. I opened the red folder Avery had left on the counter and reread the market report. $115 million. 3 solid offers waiting in the wings if I ever decided to pull the trigger. And beside it, still untouched, was the other folder Mom's. Power of attorney hidden beneath insurance forms and soft-voiced guilt. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and opened a fresh document on my laptop. Title, If I Leave. I started typing not a plan, exactly just thoughts, bullet points, names of moving companies, timelines, termination clauses in my own lease. I typed without editing, without apology. Later that night, as I brushed my teeth, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Sadie. Sadie, Mom said you're mad. She's worried. Can we talk? I stared at it, toothbrush still in hand, mint foam on my tongue. There it was again. The loop. The hand reaching back, not because it understood, but because it noticed you'd finally stepped away. I didn't answer. Not that night. Instead, I turned off the bathroom, light climbed into bed, and lay there in the dark, thinking not about what I might be leaving, but what had already been lost without my permission. 3 weeks. That's what I told Meredith. 3 weeks to burn the map. 3 weeks to decide what freedom looked like. Sunday came with the usual rituals, bread in the oven, earrings, and keys by the door, but none of it felt familiar anymore. My body moved through the motions like muscle memory, but my mind stayed somewhere else, somewhere further away. Amsterdam had begun to live in the corners of my thoughts like a faint echo. I could already see it, my name on the new office door, my feet on cobbled streets no one had cried on, no one had weaponized against me. I arrived at Mom's house 15 minutes early, just like always. The driveway was already full. Nate's rust-spotted SUV took up half the curb, and Sadie's minivan sat tilted where the front tire hugged the curb too tight. As I approached the porch, I could hear music Darla had returned to her Sinatra playlist. Something about old voices crooning over tangled family expectation felt entirely too on the nose. Inside, the air smelled like roast chicken and lemon bars. Sadie called out, "Hey! You brought salad, right?" without even looking up from where she was arranging spoons in a diagonal line next to the placemats. "Sure did," I said, setting the bowl on the table and slipping off my coat. "Kale, citrus, goat cheese." The usual. Mom emerged from the kitchen, her expression clipped with a practiced brightness. "You look nice," she said before reaching to adjust the collar of my blouse. "A little tired, though. I've had a long week." "Well?" She set her hand patting my shoulder once before slipping away. "It's nice you could make it. I know how busy things must be." Busy. Not a question. Not curiosity. Just a reminder that I was expected to be present regardless of what else was unraveling. Dinner passed like clockwork. Nate complained about supply chain issues, Sadie offered updates about Leo's new preschool, and Mom reminisced about a vacation we never took because Dad got laid off the summer after Sadie's wedding. I nodded, I smiled, I passed rolls and refilled glasses. My face never cracked. My voice never lifted. But underneath the table, my fingers stayed locked together in my lap. After dessert store-bought lemon bars that Mom claimed she'd made, I waited until the dishes had been cleared and the chatter hit that low lull when everyone starts planning their exit. That's when I spoke. "I wanted to tell you something." 3 sets of eyes turned to me. I could feel the shift subtle but unmistakable, like a theater crowd going quiet before the first line of the play. "I've sold the house. It didn't land at first, just air and stillness. Then the sound came first, a sharp breath from Sadie, then a bark of disbelief from Nate. What Sadie asked, almost laughing. "What house mine?" I said. "The duplex." "It closes in 3 weeks." Mom's glass clinked hard against the edge of her plate. "You're joking." "No," I said evenly. "I accepted a private offer. Cash. Market value. It's done." "You sold the duplex," Sadie repeated, her voice rising now. "Without telling us it's not shared property," I said. "I didn't need to tell anyone, but the kids love it there." Leo still calls it his castle. "You said we could talk about it." "No," I said calmly. "You talked. I listened." "That's not the same." Mom's hands were clenched, now tight, over the table runner. "But what about your future? What about stability? That house was your anchor." "It was also the thing you tried to use against me," I said. "You said I could afford it, so I afforded something else. A beginning that doesn't involve explaining myself every time I say no." Nate stood up, pacing now. "So you're just gonna walk away? Let strangers move in and take it." "Strangers who offered respect and money," I said. "Two things I haven't seen from this family in a long time." Sadie's voice cracked. "But you didn't even ask. You didn't let us make it right." "Make it right?" I asked, looking between them. "After the fake forms, the login attempts the assumptions. You didn't want to make it right. You wanted to make it convenient." "You're overreacting." Mom said, her tone brittle. "This isn't like you." "You're right," I said, standing. "This isn't like me. It's like the version of me that should have existed a long time ago." No one moved. No one followed when I picked up my coat, looped it over my arm, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, I turned back once. "I'm moving," I said, "and I'm not giving you the address." And then I stepped out into the cool dusk, the sky stretched wide and pale like the beginning of a canvas. Behind me, the house stayed quiet. No footsteps followed, and for the first time in years, I didn't wait for the sound of someone calling my name. The envelope was cream-colored and heavier than standard mail, with a return address from some 2-room office suite in Gresham. It arrived 2 days after the dinner. I found it wedged between a blue apron coupon and the monthly statement from my credit union. At first, I thought it was another one of those subscription charity solicitations Mom liked to forward in your name just to make you think. But when I opened it and saw the words, "Notice of Intent, Cease and Desist," typed across the top. In bold, I sat down hard at the kitchen table, barely registering the chair beneath me. The letter was 4 pages long, but it only took 1 sentence to knock the air out of my lungs. Allegedly caused financial hardship and emotional distress to clients Darla Astor and Sadie Wilkes by acting in bad faith regarding jointly understood family assets. Jointly understood. I reread the phrase 3 times. It was legal gibberish trying to dress itself up as righteousness. The rest of the document detailed my sudden and non-consensual sale of a long-standing family property, the disruption of generational housing stability, and my personal favorite, the intentional withholding of communication, which has led to significant psychological distress and loss of familial trust. I dropped the papers on the table like they burned. They were suing me. Well, not exactly suing. Not yet. But they were bluffing, hoping I'd blink. I scanned the bottom of the letter and recognized the name Ralph M. Dunning-esque, a guy I vaguely remembered from a city council ethics hearing a year ago. He'd been the kind of lawyer who wore shirts too bright for courtrooms and took pride in speaking a little too loudly in hallways. I called Sharon Liu. She picked up on the second ring. "Corinne, I got something," I said. "I think you should see it." She told me to email a scan. 5 minutes later, she called back. I didn't even finish saying hello before she started laughing. "Oh, honey," she said, "this is legally meaningless. Are you sure they're trying to scare you? There's no contract, no co-ownership, no fiduciary responsibility. They're throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping it sticks." "But emotional distress," I asked, hearing my own voice shake slightly. "That's not how any of this works. You didn't publish a hit piece. You sold a house you legally own. They'd have to prove intent to harm, and even then, They can't prove something that isn't there. I finished. Exactly. It's theater. And bad theater at that. I should have laughed with her, but I didn't. I sat quietly for a few seconds, watching sunlight filter through the window and catch the edge of the red folder still sitting on the counter. The numbers inside it hadn't changed. Neither had the decision. But something inside me had a bruise maybe forming under the skin where the blade hadn't quite broken through. It still hurts, I said finally. I know, Sharon said, her voice softening. And that's not because it's valid. It's because it came from them. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Do you want me to respond formally? She asked. No, I said. Let them sit in the silence they created. We hung up and I sat there a while longer. I read the letter again, slower this time, paying attention to every clumsy phrasing. I could almost hear my mother dictating the tone, measured outrage, bruised disappointment. Sadie would have added the emotional angle. She always knew how to turn a rejection into martyrdom. The part that stayed with me, though, was this long-standing family property, as if I hadn't bought it with my own money, as if I hadn't spent weekends scrubbing grout with my bare hands, eating microwaved soup off a folding table because I hadn't furnished it yet, as if they hadn't tried to trick me into signing over control, as if they had earned any part of it. That night, I burned the letter in the sink. Not out of rage, not out of drama, just ritual. I lit the corner with a match, watched the edges curl and blacken, and turned on the faucet once it was nothing but ash and wet paper pulp. Then I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and pulled up the Amsterdam relocation folder. I renamed it Departure. Confirmed. Let them send whatever letters they want. Let them draft fake grievances in cheap legalese. I was no longer in negotiation with people who saw my love as currency and my home as theirs by default. They could keep their bruised pride. I was keeping everything else. It had been years since I last thought about Greg. Not since the Thanksgiving he didn't show up, and Mom clucked her tongue about it like he'd personally insulted the turkey. He's always been difficult, she said, carving a little too aggressively, too sensitive for his own good. Dad had just grunted and passed the gravy. No one else asked about him. And I didn't either. I'd believed the version of the story I'd been handed. Greg refused to co-sign a loan for his sister's restaurant and then cut ties with everyone when the family expressed disappointment. I'd thought he was being dramatic, petty, maybe even selfish. Now I understood. Now I wondered if he'd stood exactly where I was, paper in one hand, betrayal in the other, and a house that suddenly felt less like home and more like a shield you had to hold up against your own people. I pulled out my old photo box that night, the one with mismatched snapshots from birthdays and holidays. There he was in the background of a 4th of July barbecue, holding a plate and laughing with my dad about something none of us remembered. There was a time he'd come to every family event. Quiet, a little aloof, but always there. Then gone. I remembered how the story shifted over time. At first, it was Greg's taking some space. Then, Greg's acting like he's better than us. Eventually, it just became, don't bring up Greg. They had erased him so cleanly, I hadn't noticed the empty chair. That was the pattern, wasn't it? When you were useful, you were golden. When you stopped giving, you disappeared. I heard Sharon's voice in my head again. It's not that they love you less. It's that they loved what you provided. They just never made the distinction. I closed the photo box and set it aside. Then I sat at my desk, pulled out a pen, and began to write. Mom, I've thought a lot about how to say this in a way that doesn't feel cruel, but the truth is, kindness without honesty is just another form of pretending, and I'm done pretending. I'm leaving. I know you'll say I've been distant lately, that I'm cold, maybe even ungrateful, but what I am is awake. For the first time in years, I'm seeing things for what they've always been, not what I hoped they were. You told me I could afford things. So I did. I afforded peace. I afforded space. I afforded a decision you didn't get to make for me. You used to say family shows up. I did. I showed up when no one else did. With money, with time, with silence. I showed up with lasagna birthday cards, bailouts, and blank checks. I showed up when it hurt. I showed up when no one said thank you. And I kept showing up because I thought love meant carrying things without setting them down, but I've learned that people who truly love you don't hand you their weight and call it loyalty. They walk beside you, they ask, they thank. They don't assume you'll bend simply because you always have. I'm not angry anymore. That passed. What's left is something quieter, a clean, necessary absence. Please don't contact me unless it's to say something real. Not another ask, not another defense. I won't read anything else. Not letters, not emails, not more explanations about how hurt you are. That feeling came after 1,000 little choices I wasn't part of. This isn't revenge. This is a boundary. One you'll finally have to respect because it's no longer up for discussion. Corinne. I read it once then twice and didn't change a word. I sealed it in an envelope, no return address. I'd drop it off at her mailbox on the way out of town. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my laptop and searched for Greg's name. It took a while, but I found him. He lived 2 hours south, worked for a small nonprofit that supported youth aging out of foster care. There was a photo on the website. He looked older, but not hardened. He was standing next to a mural of wildflowers and holding a clipboard. He looked like someone who had let go of the weight. I didn't send him a message. Not yet. But I bookmarked the page, just in case one day I needed to tell him I understood. The downstairs unit was almost empty now. Mrs. Lockwood had moved out 2 days earlier with her husband, their things packed neatly into a U-Haul with more care than most people reserved for fine china. She hugged me twice, once at the door and again by the mailbox, her eyes misty but kind. We've never had a landlord who left welcome flowers and shoveled the walk in winter, she'd said. Wherever you're going, Corinne, I hope they know how lucky they are. Now with the Lockwoods gone and the floors freshly swept, the space echoed with a kind of stillness I hadn't felt before. It wasn't sad or lonely, just honest. No rugs to soften the footsteps, no framed photos to distract the walls from being bare. Just space and air and a low afternoon light cutting through the window like a warm blade. I walked through the unit one last time, fingers brushing the edge of the built-in bookshelf I had sanded and repainted one summer when I still thought taking care of things would be enough to make people love them properly. I ran a hand along the kitchen counter, opened and closed the drawers, checked that the fridge was unplugged, the thermostat set to eco mode. It felt like a ritual, a quiet inventory of every corner I had once touched with hope. Then, near the back hallway closet, I saw it. A key hook nearly hidden by the trim right where the previous owners must have kept it. It held one item, an old brass key on a cracked leather tag. I pulled it down and turned it in my hand. The leather was soft from age and thumbed over years. On it, written in faded ink, was the word family. I stood there for a while, just looking at it. The absurdity of the label. The weight of the metal heavier than it should have been. I didn't recognize the key itself. Maybe it had belonged to the old basement lock or an attic trunk long since removed. But it didn't matter. The metaphor had already arrived uninvited and perfect. Family. This was what they'd handed me. A promise that no longer opened anything. A word that had been bent, refitted, broken down until it meant access, not connection. Obligation, not love. I could almost hear my mother's voice again, soft and layered with expectation. She's family. She'll do it. I took the key upstairs. In the kitchen, I pulled an empty glass jar from the cabinet, the kind I used to store wildflower seeds in spring. I set it on the counter, uncapped a silver marker from the drawer, and peeled the old leather label off the ring. Then I picked up a blank tag from the same drawer, clipped it through the loop, and in sharp block letters I wrote, used. Not broken, not discarded, just used. I dropped the key into the jar. It landed with a soft clink against the glass, then settled. There was no dramatic music, no sudden rush of closure. Just that small sound, the end of something I no longer needed to carry. Later that night, I left the jar on the center of my dining table. No centerpiece, no flowers. Just that one object in the middle of everything. A reminder. Some people inherit photo albums or heirloom recipes. I had inherited assumptions that I would stay, that I would give, that I would always answer the door even when the knock wasn't kind. But a key is only meaningful if it still opens something. And this one didn't. Not anymore. The next morning, I packed the last of my clothes into the suitcase by the front door. My flight was in 4 days, the Amsterdam paperwork already finalized. The house sale would close within the week. I would leave behind the jar and the folder and the silence all in their rightful places. I didn't know what my mother would do when she discovered I was gone for good. I didn't know if Sadie would try one more time to call. I didn't know if Nate would care at all. But I knew what I would do. I would board the plane. I would start over. And somewhere in a new apartment by a new river, I'd hang my own keys on a hook no one else had ever touched. The first thing I noticed about the apartment was the light. Not the cold, sterile kind that filled corporate offices back home, but something softer filtered, golden like honey poured over brick. It streamed in through tall, drafty windows that overlooked a cobbled street lined with crooked buildings and too many bikes to count. The walls were painted a worn cream, the kind that made even silence feel warm. It wasn't big, but it was mine. I arrived in Amsterdam on a Thursday. The taxi ride from Schiphol was quiet, save for the occasional buzz of my driver's phone and the polite chime of trams gliding by. I kept looking out the window, half waiting for my phone to vibrate to show a name, Sadie Mom Nate, but it stayed still, like it understood something had shifted, that I wasn't answering anymore. The apartment was mostly furnished a rental from the university housing pool for visiting researchers. I had a corner desk, a small balcony, a galley kitchen with blue tile backsplashes that looked hand-painted, and a narrow staircase that would no doubt bruise my shins 100 times over. I loved it instantly. The first week passed in a blur of meetings, orientation lunches, and jet lag. I learned to say pindakaas at the grocery store and marveled at how no one batted an eye when I dined alone. I got a bike crashed at once, then decided I preferred walking. I found a second-hand bookstore with a hidden garden and a cafe that served the best poached eggs I'd ever tasted. The city, with all its tilted facades and quiet canals, felt like a place built for reinvention. I hadn't told anyone the exact address. Not even Sharon. My work team knew how to reach me through official channels, and that was enough. There was something freeing about that, not disappearing exactly, but choosing to live without return labels. No more mail forwarding. No more emergency contacts that never showed up when it counted. Sunday came. For the first time in years, it meant nothing. No prep lists, no texts from Mom asking if I was still bringing the lasagna but not too garlicky this time. No 5-minute detours to pick up napkins someone forgot. Just stillness. I spent that first Sunday morning walking to the flower market. I bought tulips even though they were overpriced and a small pot of rosemary for the windowsill. On the way back, I stopped at a bakery and chose a tart I couldn't pronounce. I ate it on the balcony watching the city move without needing anything from me. Later that afternoon, I unpacked the last of the boxes I'd shipped ahead. Mostly books and clothes. A photo frame I hadn't filled, a candle I'd meant to use back home but never lit. Near the bottom of the final box was something wrapped in crumpled brown paper. I recognized it immediately by the weight. The lasagna dish. White ceramic, slightly chipped at the handles, the inside browned at the corners from too many family dinners. The one I had baked in nearly every week for over a decade. At first, because it was easy. Then, because it was expected. Eventually, because it was the only contribution I could make that didn't come with a price tag or a guilt trip. I held it for a moment, unsure what to feel. It wasn't that I missed the dinners, not really. I missed the person I used to be at those dinners. The woman who still believed that if she showed up enough, gave enough, stayed long enough, it would matter. I set the dish on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet dead center. Then I paused, pulled it back down, and placed it in the middle of the open shelf above the counter. Exposed. Not for use. I left it empty on purpose. Not because I had nothing to offer, but because not every dish needs filling. Not every gesture needs to be repeated just because it once felt like love. That evening, I curled up with a book and a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. My phone remained silent. I didn't check it. Instead, I made a new calendar event on my laptop Sunday, whatever you want. I named the alert not obligated, just alive, and for the first time in years, I believed it. The email came on a rainy Thursday, the kind of soft gray drizzle that painted the windows and made the canal below blur into itself. I'd just made tea chamomile a habit I'd picked up since moving and was watching steam rise from the mug when the subject line flashed across my screen. Just, please read. It was from Sadie. My stomach didn't twist this time. That was new. I opened it. Corinne Mom's not doing well. She's been quiet since the house sold. Nate left her place last week. He said she made things unlivable. I think she's drinking again. I know we haven't spoken, not really, but I wanted to reach out. I know I hurt you. Maybe we all did. Maybe I didn't even see it until now. Can we talk, Sadie? There was no attachment, no ask for money, no manipulation wrapped in a bow. It was raw, messy, maybe even honest. I stared at the blinking cursor for 20 minutes, typed a dozen replies, and deleted each one. The first one said, "You had your chance." The second, "You only reach out when things fall apart." The third was one long sentence of every memory I could summon the maternity check I covered when her husband lost hours the time she borrowed my car and returned it with a cracked taillight and no apology the way she once whispered "God, Corinne's so uptight to a friend she didn't know I overheard." Then I wrote one that simply said, "I'm in Amsterdam now. It's quiet here." But that wasn't the one I sent. I sipped my tea. Let the words come slowly like breath after a deep swim. When I finally typed the message, it was only 3 lines. Sadie, I truly hope you find peace, but I've found mine elsewhere. Corinne, I read it once, didn't edit, didn't reread, just clicked send. Afterward, I opened my contacts, scrolled to her name, and hit delete. There was no fury, no final burst of tears, just space. I had thought for years that forgiveness was the final chapter, that if I couldn't forgive them, I was unfinished somehow, that letting go had to mean welcoming someone back in. But I'd learned something here in the quiet of a foreign city, and the clean lines of a new life forgiveness isn't owed, not when the hurt goes unacknowledged for too long, not when the apology arrives only after the roof caves in. Sometimes healing looks like closure, other times it looks like distance. That night, I walked to the bridge near my building, the one with ivy crawling up the stone and padlocks clinging to the rail like stubborn little ghosts. I stood there for a long while, watching the bikes pass by in rhythm, the faint clang of gears and laughter from a passing boat. I didn't think about Sadie, or Mom, or Nate. I thought about Greg, and the way he'd looked in that photo I'd bookmarked, not bitter, not cold, just full. Like someone who had finally stepped outside the orbit of his family's gravity and learned how to breathe again. I went home, lit the lavender candle I'd unpacked weeks ago, and placed a fresh set of tulips on the windowsill. Then I made lasagna. Not because it was Sunday, not because anyone expected it, just because I wanted to. And when it was done, I served one slice to myself on a chipped blue plate. The rest I placed in containers, walked down to the entryway of my building, and left them with a note. Free. Homemade. Be kind to yourself today. I didn't sign it. No return address. Just warmth. Given freely. Without demand. The morning light came early in Amsterdam. It wasn't loud or boastful. It didn't blaze in the way sunrises did back home in Georgia. It just arrived. Soft, golden, steady. Like a promise that didn't need to prove anything. I sat by the window wrapped in a shawl I'd picked up at a street market the week before. Outside, the street was already awake. A mother in a wool coat cycled past with a toddler in a rear seat, his hands outstretched like wings. An older couple walked hand in hand, matching scarves fluttering in the breeze. A tram clanged gently down the track like it had nowhere to be but exactly where it was. My tea steamed quietly beside me. I hadn't checked my phone in 2 days. I didn't need to. In the old life, I would have been up before sunrise on Sundays, cooking, prepping, answering questions no one else bothered to ask. I would have been wearing something casual but nice, balancing a hot dish on my lap in traffic, hoping the greeting at the door didn't come laced with backhanded commentary. I would have smiled through it all and called that love. Now I just sat. There was no noise in my chest, no simmering hope that maybe this Sunday would feel different. I took a breath. Not of victory, not of triumph. Just peace. Real peace wasn't loud. It didn't come with a final confrontation or a standing ovation or a sudden burst of clarity. It came with quiet decisions, small, consistent ones. A form signed, a key relabeled, a boundary drawn so firmly even your past couldn't cross it. People always said I was the reliable one, the peacemaker, the strong daughter, the single sister who had the freedom, the flexibility, the extra room to give. What they meant but never said was, "You're the one we expect not to break." But I had broken. Quietly. Over time. Each time I wrote a check that drained my savings. Each time I nodded instead of speaking. Each time I swallowed my own need just to keep someone else's house of cards from falling. No one taught me that showing up for yourself is also a kind of love. Maybe the deepest kind. There was a small photo taped to my fridge now. One I'd printed on a whim, a picture of me hair windblown laughing with a coworker in front of the Rijksmuseum. I didn't look impressive, or polished, or even particularly put together. I looked free, and I had become something my family never expected, not just unavailable, unreachable, not in bitterness, but by choice. Somewhere miles and miles away, the house that used to hold our Sunday meals now belonged to a couple with a newborn and 2 rescue dogs. I'd left a letter in the drawer beneath the sink. This home taught me to leave. I hope it teaches you how to stay. I imagined Mom would still be spinning her version of things. I imagined Sadie might still be waiting for a reply I'd never send. Maybe they'd say I changed. Maybe they'd say I abandoned them. But the truth was simpler than all of that. I finally learned how to come home to myself. A soft breeze stirred the edge of the curtain beside me. I closed my eyes, let it pass through gentle and whole. And in that moment, no guilt, no weight, no phone ringing off the hook, just the hum of a waking city and the warmth of my own breath, I realized something they raised me to serve. But I raised myself to stay. And that was enough.